Hi and welcome to the Write channel where we talk all things creative writing. My name's Nicola Monaghan and I'm a prize-winning author from Nottingham in the United Kingdom, and today's video is all about editing and drafting. So hopefully at this stage you have your first full draft, so congratulations. If you're watching it before you get there, that's fine. Just imagine that you've got your first full draft so you understand what to do with it once you get there. For me, I really like this part. I sometimes find the first draft quite difficult, all that fear of the blank page and getting those words and ideas down in the first place. I find that can feel quite stressful and quite hard. But once I've got that first draft, once I've got the raw material to write my final novel, then that's quite exciting. So I really enjoy this stage. In a sense, that idea of it being raw material is quite an interesting one. So it's like it's a very rough cut. Let's say, for example, like a sculpture that is very kind of formless and really not quite there yet. You've got this clay, this big lump of clay, and you're trying to make it look the way you want it to. And that's what editing and drafting is all about. So this is where you take that first draft that's quite rough and potentially a slightly dirty cut on your story, and you try to turn it into something that's potentially publishable. And there are a number of stages to that process. Now, if you were working with a professional editor in a publishing house, the way your editing process would go, I mean, you wouldn't really normally send them the first draft, but the way your editing process would go once you'd sent them the right draft is that they would do, first of all, something called a structural edit, where they look at the bigger things in the story. So things like character development and whether there are any plot holes and whether there are certain aspects of the story that just aren't quite working or aren't quite believable, whether things are told in the right order and the right way. That's the first thing they do, and it's called a structural edit. Once you'd been through the structural edit, and you probably would do a couple of takes on that at the very least, then you would move on to something called the line edit, where you're looking more closely at the lines and sentences. Then you go in even closer to the text and do what's called a copy edit, where you really closely examine all the words and sentences to make sure that they're as good as they can possibly be, in terms of grammar, in terms of punctuation, and in terms of just saying what you want them to say. So that's an even closer edit. The final part of the process at a publishing house is called proofreading, and you'll have heard of that, but what it means is that the book is then typeset and put into something called proofs, which look like the pages of the actual book, and a proofreader goes through them literally word by word to check that they match the manuscript. So those are the stages. Now, in some ways, as a person working on their own and creating the first good draft of their book, later on from the first draft, the first good draft, in some ways you need to replicate that whole process. Now, what you're trying to do here is you're trying to take your first draft that's quite rough and turn it into a good draft that's ready for submission. Now, in order to do that, to some extent, you want to replicate that homing in that the publishing process does. So start with the structural bigger things and then get closer and closer to the words and sentences until you're really looking very closely and making sure that the grammar and the punctuation is right. But really, the mistake a lot of people make is they think it's all about the grammar and punctuation and getting the sentences right, and editing is about much more than that. Now, to be in the best position to start working on your first draft and to turn it into something better, you really need some space and some time away from that draft. So ideally, you need to put it away for a while. Now, Stephen King says a month. It depends on when your deadlines are, deadlines you've either set for yourself or you might have deadlines for some other reason. So it depends slightly whether that's going to fit putting it away for a month with what you want to achieve. However, I would say you need to put it away for at least several weeks so that when you open it again, you've got fresh eyes and you can actually read it with a little bit of distance from the place you were when you wrote it. In this case, fresh eyes are really important to help you see the wood from the trees, especially because you want to start with the bigger stuff. You want to start with the equivalent of what I've just called the structural edit. And that's really important. That bigger stuff is the main thing you really need to focus on and improve to make sure this story is being told in the best way possible. So at this point, you're looking for the big stuff. You're looking for story issues. You're looking for plot holes. You're looking for issues with the characters that you didn't anticipate. You're looking to make sure that you have made this story reveal itself in the best way possible. And then hopefully having fresh eyes and reading it again for the first time in a while will help you identify some of those bigger issues. You might find that you need to cut whole chapters. You might find that you need to write 3 extra chapters to explain something. You might find you need to remove a character because they're not working or change them very significantly. Or even if two characters are doing something quite similar to each other, you might want to combine them or just pick one of them to go with. And you might even find on re-examination that your ending needs to be different, because although you had this really nice cinematic ending in mind, it doesn't fit your story and it doesn't fit your characters. So these are the kinds of big changes that we're talking about at this stage. So when you're doing your structural edit and writing draft 2, you might do a bit of tweaking with the words and sentences. You're bound to find things that you want to change as you do that, but that shouldn't be your main focus. If you go straight to the words and sentences and focus right in like that from the beginning, you will miss the bigger picture. So it's important not to make that your focus. Your structural edit will be the hardest edit, no doubt about it, the one that feels most painful. This is the one where you're going to have to make the bigger changes, and some of those will have repercussions through the whole text. So you'll find yourself changing a lot of things that you didn't anticipate when you first thought about the edit you needed to make. It can be very hard to find the distance you need from your work to do a big structural edit, even if you've put it away for a while. So this can be a good time to get trusted readers involved. So people that you trust to look at your work, people who you know will give you some honest feedback but won't be cruel about it and make you want to just throw everything in the bin. Ideally, someone who's a writer themselves, so can talk in the right kind of language and consider the right kind of craft aspects as they read. But at the very least, somebody who reads novels, and preferably somebody who reads the kind of novel that you're writing. You can find these kind of beta readers online. There are groups on Facebook and stuff like that. Again, I'll put a couple of links in the description below for you to have a look for yourself. After you've done that first big structural edit, you will have what I will call the second draft. And the second draft is a really nice place to be, because once you've got the second draft, you can then start to look at the sentences, the paragraphs, the words, the chapters, and you can just try to make it as elegant and beautiful and wonderful as you can. And for me, this is where I start to really feel like I'm having fun. I absolutely love this part. So often I'll print the manuscript, or I'll print a section of the manuscript, and I'll get my red pen or my purple pen, any colour really, and I'll just go to town on the manuscript and make my notes about what I want to change. Sometimes I'll also read it on a screen, so sometimes I'll send it to my Kindle. That can be quite a good way to read it because it makes it look slightly different. It almost typesets it, and so sometimes you pick up on things you didn't notice by printing it. Because I think sometimes when you are reading it in the format that you typed it, you just read what you thought you typed or what you thought you've read several times already. So just getting it into a different format and the words in a different place on the screen can be really useful. At this point, you're looking at the text for craft issues. So this is where you look at some of those things that I talked about in the last video as the basic principles to make your writing really good. So things like trying to keep everything really immediate and trying to use scenes as much as possible, avoiding exposition or at least drip feeding it through the text. Things like getting the right balance between the scenes that you put in and the summary that you use to move the story along. So how much are you going to show in actual scenes to the reader, dramatise, so to speak, and how much are you going to tell the reader just so that they can get to the next point in the story. And getting that balance right is absolutely crucial. You'll often hear people saying show, don't tell, and that's often true, but not always true. A lot of it is about balance, because if you showed everything in the book, as I've mentioned before, it would be 3 gazillion words, and we don't want a book that long because no one's going to publish it and probably no one's going to read it. After this, and after writing my second draft and then starting to edit it, I just get closer and closer to the text and I look at it in more and more detail to try and make it as perfect as possible before I send it out to my agent or to a publisher. So I really start to focus in on the words and sentences. Now, the final stage of an actual editorial at a publishing house is that there's the proofreading. Now, it's very, very difficult to do proofreading on your own books, but there are a couple of things that you can do that kind of help and that are almost like a semi-proofreading process. One thing you can do, and one of the people who told me about this is a writer called Alison Moore. She's a Booker Prize shortlisted writer, and it's for a reason. And one of the things that she does when she's getting to this point in her editing process is that she prints things out in a really large, weird, ugly font. And she says that she finds when she sees it in that font, she can really see where the issues are and where the problems are and the things she wants to tweak and change. I'd listen to that tip because I think Alison's a fantastic writer and her work is so well edited. It's some of the most perfect prose I've ever read. So I think that's a good tip from the top. Another thing that I had never thought of doing until I heard it from another writer, and that was Kerry Hudson, another excellent writer. So again, one to listen to. and that is to read your own work aloud in that final part of the draft. So Kerry literally gets her manuscript and she reads it to herself, and she spots things in the manuscript that she never would have done if she wasn't reading it aloud. Now this is quite hard work and quite tiring, but it's well worth setting aside to do something like this. Another trick which I've found which has really helped me is that you can actually get Microsoft Word to read your work to you, and you can do it with all sorts of software and writing programs, but Microsoft Word will read the text to you so you can hear it and listen to it. The thing about this, even though it's a bit weird to hear the computer reading your work with a mechanical voice, it's actually also really useful, because when you hear the sentences read in that way, and each word is highlighted as it goes, so it really shows you and highlights the grammar of the sentence and the structure of the sentence, so you really get a sense of whether it's correct or not. But not only that, in some ways, having the mechanical voice reading brings the rhythm of the sentence really clearly to you. So it's actually a really fantastic way of doing that final really close edit. I've been using this all the time recently, and I've found that it's ended up meaning that my work's been so much cleaner than it used to be once I send that draft to somebody else. So I really recommend trying this. So once you've done all that, you should have a polished draft that is better, that is well written, that is well structured and is well edited and is ready to send out into the world. Good luck. Do tell me in the comments if you finish your drafts, and tell me how this process has gone for you. And also if there's anything that I've missed on this video that you'd like me to talk about more, or that you think I could add into this discussion on editing and drafting. So coming up next on the Write channel, I'm going to have my Craft Talk series where I'm going to take you through those different aspects of writing to help you improve the way you write. And I'm also going to do some technical stuff with you about how to use Scrivener and Word in the best possible way to help you with your writing. So do subscribe and press the bell button so you can be notified as soon as those videos are posted. Thanks for joining us here. I hope this video has been useful, and hopefully see you in the next one. Take care.